point does a country revolt? It's a very interesting question, isn't it? And one might argue a fairly pertinent one, looking at the state of the world today. So I thought it'd be fun if we run through a couple of historic revolutions and see if we can find a common theme through them and figure out what is actually the point where people turn to revolution as an alternative to simply going along with their government. And I think one of the first ones to look at, well, even in just chronological order, you look at the French Revolution, and it is the situation in France in, was it 1789, is very, very stratified economy. You've got extreme wealth inequality, where basically all the resources, all the money is owned by just this top 1% of people, and everyone else is fighting for scraps. But it's only when they start having a shortage of bread and shortage of food that the people actually turn to revolution. So I think you could make a case then that it probably wasn't so much about a political idea so much as the fact that they needed to get the food coming. Like, that is a critical, that's survival, right? So that's why they had to turn to revolution, because the government at the time was not providing what they needed to survive. Therefore, it made more sense to go against the government than to cooperate with it any further. So, obviously that's the extremely short version of the French Revolution, but that's what kicks it off. It morphs into something else later, but that's the first stage. Around the same time, so looking at 1791, the Haitian Revolution kicks off, which is by far the most interesting and least talked about revolution when you're looking at, big revolutions. We plan to do a whole video on that very soon, but basically look at what was going on in Haiti, set in the island of Santo Domingo. It is, the most horrific thing you can possibly imagine. It's like a horror movie. Haiti was the richest of France's colonies. It has the most fertile land, has so many resources and minerals, and it is just one giant, massive plantation. And the brutality that happens on this island is like a test bed for how far you can get away with mistreating slaves. And there's always a very big misconception about what slavery really is, because you hear like a lot of Europeans talk about, well, we had slavery as well, we were indentured servants and all that, and you go, there's a very, very big difference between being at the lowest class in a society where you're basically in so much debt that you are owned by someone else. That is a very different dynamic to chattel slavery, which is what this is, where you're not even human, and your routine torture, murder, the kidnapping of your children so they can be sold as slaves, that is a whole other level of cruelty. There's never been anything quite like it. And the place it is absolutely at its worst, where they're even testing new methods of torture for their efficiency, is Haiti. So the Haitian Revolution comes about out of pure necessity. It is literally about survival. There is nothing else to lose by revolting against that system, and of course they do. And it is a long and very bloody and fascinating story. And again, it deserves a whole video, so I won't dive too much into it right now. Now let's fast forward to let's think of another revolution for comparison. Let's go to the next one, which is the Russian Revolution. So 1917. Again, you notice a very similar thing that what's happening in the French Revolution. There has been, this absolutely apocalyptic war that Russia's been raging in World War One, and the people are watching their sons and brothers and fathers just continually come back. It remains from the front line. The trains are breaking down under the strain of their economy collapsing. And once again, you start seeing the bread run out. And it seems to be a common cause that when food starts to not, be produced to the people, they head to revolt. So again, this seems to be about survival. Now, let's look at the Cuban revolutions, fast forward again. So 1959, where under Batista in Cuba, they have this hyper-capitalist society where all the land is basically owned by American private companies, and workers' rights have been stripped. Their access to any decent standard of living has been stripped, even from what it was like 5 years earlier. And so the revolution comes about, again, out of a need to actually have a good standard of living. So that, again, I would almost call that survival, but it's pretty damn close. So again, we're noticing a theme here. Now, you may have noticed that I left out probably the most famous revolution, and I did it on purpose because I have come to the conclusion that it's not really a revolution at all. And that's, of course, the American Revolution. The way we're taught about, it's the American society in, what's it, like 1775-ish? What they get overtaxed, so they decide to have a revolution and kick the British out of the colony. Does that narrative, I don't know, does that seem too simplistic to you? Because it does to me. And when I started doing some diving into the American Revolution, I came to a very different conclusion about what it actually is. And I think what the American Revolution really is a coup. Because what you really had was rich American landowners basically kick out the British rich landowners. And they just replace the government, because for the standards of living of the people in the American colonies, nothing much changes. Like, they write this really big, beautiful constitution, right? That sounds wonderful, but materially nothing changes. And so I think you could argue that it's not really a revolution, or it's been repainted as one. But what I think actually happened in the American Revolution too, it was a power struggle between Britain and America, because America becomes so fabulously wealthy because of slavery. Like, it is chattel slavery, as we're talking about in Haiti, is the reason. I mean, that's what builds America. It's what creates all the wealth, because you have some of the most fertile land in the entire world. It is absolutely covered in slaves, like tens of millions of people in the worst form of slavery. So you basically have massive areas of production, and not only are you not having to pay the people working on it, you can abuse them as much as you want and force them to work as hard as you want. And if they disobey, you can do anything you want to them. That is a capitalist dream, right? And the thing is, this doesn't work in Britain, because Britain doesn't have the same sort of situation. It doesn't have the subtropical climates that you can grow tons of tobacco and cotton and sugar and all the really big commodities that make America so rich. You can't do that in Britain. So chattel slavery, even though Britain is one of the big traders in it, it doesn't really pick up in Britain. And I think it's the British realization that if they don't shut down slavery, America will end up being more powerful and more rich than Britain, which of course it does, right? And so that's why one of the first countries to really shut down the slave trade is Britain. But it's not for any kind of moral reasons. It's because they want to shut it down in America so that they can maintain control of America. And it's that point that kind of drives, it's that discussion of we're going to get rid of slavery that leads to the American upper class saying, no, we're going to revolt against them. And again, not a revolt, it's just a coup, right? So they can keep doing slavery for another 100 years. Anyway, I think that's an interesting point. I don't think the American Revolution really is a revolution. Which brings us to the question, so what is it? What actually does create the situations of a revolution? And if you ask me, it really comes down to one very simple thing: necessity. People only revolt against their government when it becomes necessary to do so. Everyone would prefer to just live a peaceful life. And if this government can work for you in at least a bearable way, you're going to tolerate it. People only revolt once it becomes intolerable to work under that government. It sounds simple, right? But that's really the basis of all the real revolutions we're looking at here. And I think if we can make the case that the first American Revolution wasn't really a revolution, I think whatever is brewing in America now probably is, because the situation sounds far more like all of the other ones we've been talking about in this talk. It sounds like the French Revolution, it sounds like the Haitian Revolution, obviously not as extreme, but the situation in America now is becoming dire. And I think the necessity to go against this government rather than cooperate with it is probably approaching if something isn't done pretty urgently to change it. Anyway, that's just my very quick thoughts on the subject. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. But I think that's interesting, and hopefully it's given you something to think about.